Greetings, friends. I'm Gemini Brett, and it is an honor to be back here at EA Zoom meetings. It's been a while for me. It's been since this great transition. And the great transition, I remember hearing about Linda and writing, I wonder where the special souls go. It really is these times when we know loved ones who move to the other side, where we have to ask why and where and how, and it helps us, learn more about what this place is or perhaps is not. And I think that's something we are asked as astrologers to bring to the chart. Ours is a sacred science, and that balance between the sacred and the science is always interesting. And I think we change where we are in that along our way. I think it's very helpful to have a cosmology, and of course, evolutionary astrology paradigm is very much rooted in a cosmology. My approach is a little bit different, and I think a lot of it's based upon what I see in space with my face or in the sky with my eyes. I'm a big why guy, right? So I'm taught a thing, and it's like, okay, but why? Why? And I'm learning to be a little bit more respectful and not ask that out loud immediately if the case is not ripe for that type of interrogation in the moment. But then I go out and I ask nature. And while so many of the astrological techniques that I've come to learn and love and utilize, and especially in some of the more kind of traditional techniques I found my way to, I don't find much astronomy in them. There's like counting techniques. There's a lot of geometry, a sister science of ours. And I think the musical harmony, which is another study of mine, like helps. But while I honor that there is some fabric of nature I just can't see and maybe can never train myself to, there's a whole side of our craft that I feel is incredibly visible, and that's one thing that's really turned me on about studying ancient astrology as well, is how much the visibility of those planets, which can be seen with our eyes, matters, and when planets disappear and when planets arrive on the scene again. So today I'm going to be speaking about Lilith in the chart. Well, there's many Liliths, right? So there's an asteroid with that name. There's an idea of a second moon of Earth, and this one's called Dark Moon Lilith, where we have our moon, who you know so well, and that there is some other moon that we can just never see because of some kind of astronomical awesome stuff. Now, most would suggest that that's not true, but there are ephemerides for that second moon. Just as if you've tuned into the idea of the planet Vulcan before. And I don't mean I mean the planet that hypothetically exists between Mercury and the sun. And this is like a whole thing, like in the astronomical world for a while. Based upon what appeared to be some kind of gravitational perturbations in the orbits of other beings. This planet was theorized, and it's like a significant planet in some astrological paradigms, which I think is an amazing thing. So perhaps there is a dark moon, perhaps not. I mean, that we can have tables for it. If it's not there itself is an intriguing thing. The Lilith, most of us are looking at, is called the true black moon. So what is that? Well, we're going to have a look today, and I mean astronomically, okay? And then apply that astronomy to a cosmology. Now, I will share how it works within my own current cosmological framework, which is consistently shifting and evolving. And I'm not really telling you that my framework should be yours. What my intent is to show you the astronomy of Lilith, and that you apply that to your own cosmological approach to a chart. And that will make more sense as we move along. In this sense, it's true to this half of my craft, which is devoted to a visible relationship with the living sky. And on that side, I am very fond of saying that astrology is so much more than some poetic, well, that some symbolic language alone, that astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And this is why I'm so devoted to a living relationship with the sky. I've seen it just changes the way I astrologize. You know, it helps me. Answer is a strange word, but understand more about these questions that, or um, delineations or suggestions that I wide. You know, why would that be? And then I go to the sky and watch, and it's like, oh, that's why. And oh, right, and that's what that teacher said. Or, oh, I get it, like that's what they were talking about, ancient astrologer in this translation was talking about. I couldn't really get it, but once I questioned it and went to the sky and looked, you know, like I'm watching the sun as I'm speaking just set. You can see the rays on my face. That will end very soon. I wish I could show you the vision actually, because the sun is illuminating a gigantic pine tree on a hill that I call Solstice Hill, because at December solstice time, the sun sets on the hill. It's not quite to the solstice point yet, but it's getting really close, right? And just watching how the sun sets every day, noticing that it takes a different amount of time to set in one sign than it would in another. And that brings me into the great why, when I asked, having read about straight and crooked signs and things like this from the ancient texts or from teachers, it's like, well, why is that? And never being satisfied with the reason, I think, is it's a curse and a blessing. And I'm sure you resonate with where I'm coming from. And sometimes it's just not good enough to hear the teacher say, this is what it is, even when they say this is why it is. Like, we need to go and have our own experience. And then, of course, as working astrologers, we are able to see these theories that the sky whispers in our ears, and see if they work or if not. Now, there's always the potential that we are just either seeing what we need to see in a chart to confirm what we want to see, right? Okay. Or even the potential that we're not necessarily massaging the chart to agree with what our own working cosmology or something like that, but that because we are in a specific kind of cosmological vibration, that allows us to call charts to us that resonate with that vibration, with that approach. And should we change gears at some point, then folks who are more aligned to that vibe are going to start to show, right? It's a really confusing thing, astrology, and I think a very important question of like, how much is this is like just real, this weird thing, or how much of it am I creating? Yeah. And I don't think that that's a question that we're really allowed to have answers for. So a lot of this, it really is faith, you know? And I think that's alive and beautiful and well on the sacred side of the sacred science. Now, many, you know, astrologers would completely disagree that you learn the math and you apply the equations and you get to the right answers and you can help somebody know when to buy a car, you know? And that's cool. And we want to learn our rules. And, you know, I like that. I used to really shy away from questions like, when should I make this investment? Or when will there be money in my life, you know? And I was like, well, let's talk about abundance, man. You know, and these days, like, I appreciate having some tools that help me address these questions, even if they aren't the questions that my general energetic would prefer to be asked, I guess, you know. So here I am kind of going off into a strange rant and getting lost in space and getting pretty far away from Earth. Oh, which is exactly the kind of thing that's going to bring me back on track. So Lilith is a very interesting being. And it's going to be helpful when we look at some of the pictures to unfold what Lilith is astronomically. But without understanding the astronomy of a thing, we're kind of limited to our experiential witness of it, right? In the mundane world, in our own lives, in witnessing the lives and changes of our clients or loved ones or people close to us, right? So that's something really solid, living research-based experiential astrology. That's our best friend as growing astrologers. Another level is what's in a name, and so much, right? I really value the astrologers today who are exploring Ixion and Haumea and Makemake and, or Pholos, so dwarf planets and centaurs, or the hundreds of thousands of named asteroids. If you've played, you've seen freaky things, right? But with a lot of these beings, like, we really are restricted to its name. And in that event, like if I talk about Eris, for example, right, who I'm sure is a dwarf planet, right? So it's kind of like a hard thing to say sometimes, because in 2005, we know the astronomers demoted Pluto from planet to dwarf planet status. And much of that had to do with the discovery of Eris. And honestly, astronomically, Pluto is a very different kind of being than Uranus and Neptune, and much, much, much more like Orcus and Ixion and Haumea, Makemake and Eris and the other beings, like way out there. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this: orbital inclination, composition, it's position, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If these astronomers had consciously experienced a Pluto transit, they probably would be calling Pluto a planet and a half. Anyway, Pluto's name feels rather appropriate. And a lot of Pluto's name will have to do it, as it seems true for Uranus and Neptune too, these newly named planets. We can offer that as well. Before Pluto, we had the discovery of, the first 4 discovered and named asteroids, Ceres and Vesta and Pallas and where am I? Juno, right? So what's in a name? Like, that's kind of all we have to work with. Orcus, what is that? Haumea, what is that? Oh, well, Haumea is this kind of creator force, this creatress goddess of Hawaii or islands of the South Pacific and Polynesian myth. And so what does that mean about you or me? I have Venus conjoined Haumea. I didn't know that when I went to Hawaii for what I considered to be a Venus ceremony, not knowing that it's like Venus Haumea, and I went to Hawaii, and that just makes sense, right? So we see these things in astrology all the time that are like mind-blowing and confirming of this path that we are on. And maybe you don't have a cynical side. I do. And I think it's not an unhealthy thing for an astrologer to have. Like, a dream once, I love to share this, that I was at this like strip mall, and there was a yellow awning marked psychic, and next door a yellow awning marked skeptic. And I was like, wow, I shop at both of those places, and I think that's okay. Usually when we talk about Eris, we're going to talk about the golden apple marked Callisti, right? For the fairest, that Eris threw into the wedding she was not invited to, and this basically led to the Trojan War, a lot of points in between, right? And that therefore that's what Eris means. And then we can go look around at significant timings, like the current long-standing Capricorn Pluto square to Aries Eris, and see that myth is whispered there, or sometimes even shouted. But again, this comes down to, well, how much are we just seeing what we believe we should see based upon the symbol as we've named it? But who named it? And that's, I think, a very fun thing too, right? It's like astronomers are naming these beings not with astrological intent, or so we think. I will, as a card-carrying Scorpio, I will hold space for any of this. But Uranus, like, it took some time for that planet to be named. Oh, look, nobody had to name a planet before, or when they did, we don't know, right? I mean, the visible lights were visible since all the way back, and now there's a new one. And then Neptune. And then rules were created for how you name planets and that kind of thing, which is great, But we see in those planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, doing something in the way in which they were discovered. Uranus discovered by accident, Neptune discovered because something was pulling on Uranus and we knew where to point the telescopes because of math. That basically supports the idea that we all have pull on one another. We're all, of the same ocean, which feels very Neptunian to me. Pluto, Great Depression, a lot of things happening, especially in the European front between the world wars that feel very resonant with the name of that planet, though, as you know, it came in through, the daughter of an astronomer. I mean, it's a really trippy story. How was Lilith named and when? And if you know, please reach out. You can find me at GeminiBrett.com. There's a contact button right there. I would love to hear more about this. It's evidence that I have not done as much research here as I would like to. But does Lilith, as a point in the chart, behave like a planet, even though there's no body there? Does it work like a node, where, of course, we know there are no bodies at the nodes either? I mean, do you do Lilith like a planet? I mean, is it Lilith in a sign and in a house and aspects with other planets? Is that the way we should work with Lilith as astrologers? I've seen it work that way. And what's in a name? So what does this name Lilith tell us? And I think I'll get into some of the astronomy and then we'll get to that. Before I do, I just want to say that when we dive deep into our myths, the way that we know Neptune astrologically doesn't necessarily resonate entirely with Neptune, Poseidon from the stories. I mean, in some ways, yes, and that's, I think, a very personal thing to say also. Uranus, like Rictarnus, I believe, was the first to promote the idea that Prometheus was a better mythological fit for how Uranus operates in the chart and by transit, better than Uranus sky god. Maybe, right? But I mean, if Uranus is more than just that name, and Neptune is more than just that name, and even Pluto is more than that name, then should we constrict our understanding of an Eris or a Maki or Haumea to what we find in the myths associated with the name? I think the answer, you can hear my opinion, it's a rhetorical question, and the answer is no, but it's a place to start. And there is something magical happening here, right? I mean, I think especially if these planets and points and other things are named without astrological intent, then who's naming them? I mean, in general, how does that work, right? Like, who chose your name? And maybe you've heard the story behind it. Yeah, I think that my parents liked some actor called Brett, and so it was one of the top boy names on the list. And I could have been Alex, and I can't remember why that one. I think that was like some friend or something. I guess I should learn these stories. But, how much did I have to do with that? There's some astrological approaches that can show us that the name is like encoded in the chart in the time of the birth too. You know, did I choose my birth time, my birthplace, my name, my parents, my social situation? You know, like these are interesting questions for astrology. I think some of the most interesting questions cannot be answered in the chart. Or maybe they can if we learn how to read it in a new way. What's in a name? All right, let me dive in here. We'll play with some slides. This is what I was going to talk about today. Specifically, this chart on our right. I am recording this on December 2nd, 2021 in the Empire Pope's calendar anyway. Started at 4:30 p.m. Pacific. I sit in El Sobrante, California. Now, surprisingly, 23 minutes have passed by. Sometimes I create all these slides just to keep me in the flow and on track. So I might as well just hit play right when the record button is pressed. Anyway, we are in an interesting time. And these symbols here might be a little overplayed, but also not. We are, of course, in eclipse season. Here in the eclipse cauldron. And on the left, we see a very near total lunar eclipse and the longest partial lunar eclipse in a millennia, which is an interesting truth. And you see that near blood red moon and Medusa in the front. And why? Because the zodiacal degree to which the star Algol projects to longitudinally was very close to where that near total lunar eclipse aligned, right? 26 degrees and change tropical Taurus hosts the fixed star Algol in our day and age, which has connections with Medusa constellationally, mythologically, and there's a lot to say about that star. And there's a lot that the ancients have said where it kind of feels, you know, that they took it too far. And yet, then we find interesting correspondences if we look at enough charts where the star is highlighted. On the right, we see a image of a diamond ring, a total occultation of the sun by the moon, the total lunar eclipse. Now, only folks in like Antarctic and ice will have an opportunity to catch that vision with their eye during this particular eclipse, which is that far south on Earth, at least where it can be seen in totality. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean we won't be it. But here you see an image of a heart with a scorpion. And why? Because in our day and age, the fixed star Antares resides around 10 degrees tropical Sagittarius. And so this eclipse is, with many points of view, within orb of that fixed star for it to be considered a royal eclipse, a royal total eclipse. And so I was excited to share all about that in the associated Saros series of the eclipse. But then I kind of changed my mind. Why is this one on the left the longest partial lunar eclipse of a millennia? How do you see that in a chart? Or how can you at least get some hints that it might be the case on the chart? What about this eclipse on the right, the total solar eclipse? How can you tell that it's total? How do you know to tell about eclipses in a chart anyway? So let's talk astronomy a little bit, and then we'll get back to the Lilith trip. Dragons eating suns. Bacchanal, the dragon who eats the 7 moons. So many stories of serpents or dragons eating the sun or the moon during this eclipse phenomena. Why is that? You know, I read this paper recently on academia, where very much an academic author, was talking about how there are these dragon and snake myths around the world associated with eclipse, but nothing in the Western tradition. Now, is Egypt not Western? So anyway, there's a very different kind of expression of what is Eastern and Western in astrology than in most of academia, you know. I will say that here on the right, that is the image from the Ripley scroll, one of the great alchemical scrolls, right, where we clearly see a dragon in the sun and the moon, and we see serpents and dragons in the alchemical woodcuts all over the place. The bottom center, that's Rahu, yeah, so this is one of the Indian stories of Rahu's revenge, Rahu eating the sun at the time of a solar eclipse, but he's been decapitated, so then the sun just passes through the truncated neck, right? So it disappears but re-emerges. At the top, that's Bakunawa, the moon eater in Filipino mythology. And I mean, I could speak about all of these, but I will just say importantly, you know, if you want to consider Western, like as academics do, the kind of Greco-Roman rooted tradition, well, that Ripley scroll and in the upper left, that's one of the alchemical woodcuts, like those are definitely Western things. And so is this. This is Latona pursued by Python, or if you prefer the Greek, that is Leto, holding her children. Now, she wasn't holding them yet, okay? As the story goes, Latona was being chased by Python, who was conjured forth by a jealous Juno. Why? Because she heard the truth that Latona was carrying the child of her husband, Jupiter, right? And so you can go Jupiter, Juno, Latona, or Zeus, Hera, Leto. Anyway, she's pregnant with this child. They actually ended up being two, and she was chased away from the safety of a midwife to help her with this birth. But she was also blessed from on high and given refuge, and she gave birth to the first. The first, yes, because there were twins. The first was Diana, who has since taken over reign as goddess of the moon. And you know that moon is the light of the midwife. So Diana's first gig was delivering her brother Apollo, who would take over then as the regent of the sun. So somehow this birth of the moon and the sun, or at least their guardians, in this Greco-Roman tradition, has serpent all over it. Now, is it a stretch to call this an eclipse myth? Because you might hear that that's what I'm doing. And I'd say absolutely not. There's a couple other things which are, for example, some suggest it was 9 days and 9 nights between the births of Diana and Apollo, or you might prefer Artemis and Helios. And how many hours are in 9 days? How many hours are in 9 nights? There's some really deep mysteries there. If you turn into the number 108 and 216, if you know the radius of the moon is 1080 miles and diameter 2160, and I could go on and on and on, but I think instead we'll run to this next slide. Later in life, when he was grown, Apollo caught up with that serpent who had chased his mother when he was riding in the womb and put an arrow right through its head. Okay, so let's see. The sun's bow launching an arrow through the head of the dragon. And since you speak astrology, you too can hear in this eclipse. When do we see Apollo's bow? When do we see a crescent sun? Only during lunar eclipse. Now, there's much more to see here. One thing I'll share is that during the solar eclipse, Did I say lunar eclipse before? We only see the bow of the sun during a solar eclipse, yeah? When the moon itself is occulting the light of the day. And we get this diamond ring, you know, this beautiful image of Hieroskymos, of sacred marriage. And as I love to say, the great gift of the solar eclipse is we can see with the human embodied eye that sun and moon, circle and crescent, spirit and soul are the same size. Solar eclipses happen for minutes. Yeah, I mean, long one, like 7 minutes, a super long solar eclipse, 7 minutes long. And during the process, right, we basically see all of the shapes that the moon expresses during the course of a month. Now, we get to see some shapes that the moon cannot express, right, which are those little bites out of the sun. And we don't really get to see that edgy half, that weird line that we see at quarter moon times. But there is this general feeling that all phase you typically see over the course of a month is given to you in minutes. And so in this way, eclipses offer like acceleration portals. And so we bring in the time machine. Because I would also say there's an image here, and this is what the sky has taught me over time, where it's an acceleration portal, but also by going back in time and maybe kind of cleaning up on our self some things that weren't complete so we can move forward. And I mean, whether in this lifetime or ones before. So why would I say about this backwards or going back? Well, this arrow here is expressing what we call the primary motion. And you got to take your chart out of the middle of a transit chart if you want to see it happen, or just go outside and watch the sky. If you do that by daytime, or let's say we wake up before the sun, we can see the sun rise in the east, right, into the 12th house, and then it's going to go 12, 11, 10 to culminate at midday, and then setting through 9, 8, 7 until it goes back underground, and we call that night, right? So we're so used to having our chart in the middle and pushing play that everything's going this way, which is the orbital or secondary motion. And we often miss, and I find it difficult sometimes as an astronomy for astrologers teacher to help astrologers see what we call the primary motion, which is simply the rising and the reaching and the resting and the rooting of the sky and all of its beings, including the sun, which brings day. And then once again, night, yeah? And that's, as you well know, since you are a human being who has been outside, regardless of what your government might want, rising in the east, setting in the west. So together during the solar eclipse, moon and sun rise. Actually, the moon rises before the sun. Like, I mean, if you are somewhere on Earth where you can, like in this case, watch a total solar eclipse go down. And I learned a lot in my one experience of doing that in 2017. Still learning a lot from whatever the heck happened in that moment. It was a lot. But the moon rises actually before the sun. And then as they are moving through the sky together, the moon passes in front of the sun. And that's according to the secondary motion, which is what we're used to watching as astrologers. It's the orbital motion, or the planets, in this case, the luminaries through the zodiac. And we know, it takes the sun a year to get around and the moon a month, or the sun moves about 1 degree per day and the moon about 13 1/3 degrees per day. So a moon rises first and then the sun, but as they're coming up together, the moon is going to pass in front of the sun, and that is the eclipse. And why I would say there's this time machine thing, or kind of going backwards in time, is, well, let me bring in like a young moon. Now, this is the Northern Hemisphere point of view. I took that picture in Berkeley, California. We get this every month, right? So it's kind of rare to experience Apollo's bow, the crescent sun, but the crescent moon is, our monthly friend. And the young moon is born in the West. after the conjunction, after the new moon separates from the sun. And so after sunset, we see that thin smile of Diana, who is always aiming arrows at her brother Apollo below. And you can see just in that young crescent moon, the Taurus glyph, right? The crescent of soul, the moon above the circle of spirit, the sun. The only one of the sign glyphs that is composed like the planet glyphs are of those elements, right? Crescent, circle, cross, not in this glyph, but in the planet glyphs, which are soul, spirit, and matter, crescent, circle, cross. So Diana's bow we see every month, and just like the myths tell us, right? What does Diana deliver to Earth? Apollo's birth. The moon delivers sunlight to your eyes. And Diana's bow, so this is both northern hemisphere view, that solar eclipse above, and then here this crescent moon. This is the young moon, right? So this crescent during the eclipse, it happens just before the eclipse, which will be equivalent to the new moon or no moon. And then so basically we see like the waning phases, the waxing phases, and then it goes new, and then the waning phases. And that's backwards, right? Usually we go from new to waxing to full to waning. The fullness would be, the full sun. So I guess I am talking about eclipses after all, and perhaps that's enough of that. I hope that this eclipse to come, aligned to the Scorpion's heart, this royal star, will bring more heart than stinger, and help bring light into your world by allowing you to see things that typically lurk in the shadow and excusing them from the plane. So Apollo's bow, the crescent sun, shooting an arrow through the dragon's head. Well, what is the dragon's head, friends? And we call it a slide that's out of place. And then the nodes, right? So this is a valuable slide. Maybe you have this somewhere. If not, take a screenshot. Wait, hold on a second. Okay. Eclipse limits. Now, there's a little bit of an extension for lunar eclipses if you consider penumbral lunar eclipses, which are full moons passing through the shadow of Earth's atmosphere, which does not cast much of a shadow. So they basically look like full moons, rather than the umbra, which is the shadow of Earth's rocky body. All right. So if you count penumbral lunar eclipses, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but they're not on this list. Okay. So if the full moon aligns within 12.25 degrees of either north or south lunar node, a partial eclipse is possible. If within 9.5 degrees, it will be absolutely a partial lunar eclipse, unless it aligns within 9.5, like less than 9.5, and it might then be total. Sorry, within 6. Let me just take that away though, and let's talk about dragon's heads and dragon's tails first. So at the bottom, we have a very rudimentary geocentric, which means Earth-centered image of the lunar node picture. So the sun is on the path that we call the ecliptic, right? That's the Earth-Sun relationship, that plane. Really, it's the plane on which Earth orbits the sun, or our annual revolution. But from Earth's point of view, we see the sun moving about us on that plane and against the backdrop of the zodiac constellations. The moon is on a different course. I like to call the ecliptic, the plane of the sun, the one ring that rules them all, the circle of gold, or the circle of spirit, for it's where the sun lives, where this silver image is the circle of soul, or the circle of silver. Now it separates from the ecliptic by about 5 degrees, both north. You can see this is like northern hemisphere up. So this is north, and also south, a little bit more than 5 degrees by what we call latitude, celestial latitude. That's north or south of the ecliptic plane, okay? And every month, if you consider my arm here, the ecliptic, every month the moon is snaking above and below the path of the sun. It's crossing from the south to the north at the north lunar node. And about a week later, it gets to the northern bending. It's maximum northern latitude, about 5 degrees north of the ecliptic plane. And then it bends back down and crosses from the north to the south at the south lunar node, the dragon's tail, and the southern bending, and then the north node, the dragon's head. Oh, right. What, didn't Apollo shoot an arrow through the dragon's head? Yes, because when we have an eclipse, it is the luminaries aligning at the nodes, for they are the places where the paths of silver and gold intersect. The image shown is of a new moon, and it shows us, well, why most new moons are no moons, because the moon can't be seen in this, zodiacal conjunction with the sun, because from the northern hemisphere point of view, it's above, or southern hemisphere below, you see? So no moon for you. The moon is under the beams. The moon and the sun, as we know, have to meet near the lunar nodes for there to be, if it's a full moon, a lunar eclipse, or a new moon, a solar eclipse. The lunar phenomena is actually is a like tighter criterion. Again, within 12.25 degrees, maybe a partial lunar eclipse, definitely a partial lunar eclipse if within 9.5 degrees of the nodes. Maybe total if within 6 degrees of the nodes, definitely a total lunar eclipse if moon and sun oppose full moon within 3.75 degrees of the nodes. For a solar eclipse, new moon must meet within 18.5 degrees of either north or south node. Now, if within 15.33 degrees, definitely solar eclipse, seen somewhere on Earth. If within 11.25, definitely maybe a total solar eclipse or annular. And it's definitely going to be total or annular if within 10 degrees. All right, 9 degrees in 55 minutes, but who's counting? 10's easier to remember. So if you see a new moon within 10 degrees of either north or south node on the chart, you're going to get Apollo's bow, who's shooting the arrow. What is the arrow? It's that line drawn from one node through the heart of the Earth to the other node, right? It's like a living syzygy, these nodes in this arrow. Syzygy meaning the alignment of the three things, right? So the eclipse is the visible alignment of sun, moon, earth, either full moon for the blood moon, the lunar eclipse, or new moon for the diamond ring, the solar eclipse, yeah, or the ring of fire, that's the annular eclipse. So what about this asterisk? What do we do with that, and how do we see that in the chart? How can we tell, even if an solar eclipse, a new moon, meets within 9 degrees and 55 minutes of either north or south node, like how do we know if it's total or annular? In a chart, how could you tell? Now we have a lot of cool astronomy researches, right? Resources. But it's nice to be able to see this in a chart. Maybe you're doing client work and you rewind to the prenatal eclipse, which is definitely worth your time. You probably have found that to be true if you've been reading charts for a while. If you haven't checked out your prenatal eclipse, please do. It's something I really love to look at with clients, and to go through the eclipse return years, the nodal return windows, the Cero series, the Metonic series. Like that's where my heart thrives. One of my many kind of favorite sandboxes of our wonderful cosmic craft. What is an prenatal eclipse? What does it do? Really cool questions, which really require a ton of cosmology slash faith slash, I mean, honestly, nobody likes this word in the science realm, but basically religion, you know, to say like what's actually happening with a soul during the prenatal eclipse, right? I mean, we can read what the ancients wrote, though there's not too much available. Or, I mean, you're not having experience of that. It's a lot of faith, and that's okay. So for us to know whether an eclipse is partial, total, annular, we need to see how close to the nodes the luminaries align, and we also need to honor Lilith. And I don't mean the asteroid Lilith or the dark moon Lilith, but I mean black moon Lilith. So it's this really interesting name that's found its way to this dark point in space, black point in space, I guess. Now this image here is extremely exaggerated, all right? But what it's showing us is that the moon, Earth, orbital happening, okay? And here we show it in the model that we learned in school, which is moon orbiting the Earth. Truthfully, they orbit each other. They have a kind of common choreography as they together dance about the sun. But using the model of moon orbiting Earth is okay. This is not a circular path. Orbits are not circular, they are elliptical. And while circles have one center, ellipses have two foci. One of the moon Earth foci is within the bounds of Earth. It's not at Earth's center, and there's a wobbling created as a result. And yeah, I would encourage you to check out the Berry Center. There's a lot to be found there. I think there's a lot for us to bring back to our astrology from our modern expanded awareness and understanding, or attempts for understanding of astronomy. Anyway, so one of these foci is within Earth's bounds. The other is this like dark point in space. There's nothing there, but it's this like well of Earth Moon love, y'all. You know, it's like, and this is this point that we have come to call Black Moon Lilith. Why? Now, importantly, you see a couple other words here and on the title at the top of the page, which are apogee and perigee. G is Earth, okay? Geo, like geocentric. Perigee means close to Earth. Apogee means far from Earth. Venus is, as I'm recording this now, getting close to perigee because she's retrograde, which means Venus is about to pass Earth by. She's actually not retrograde yet. She's slowing down to station. But that is Venus passing Earth by. And the truth is, any retrograde planet is close to the Earth. I should say the center of a planet's retrograde period is that time or around the time when they are at perigee, closest to Earth, okay? Mercury right now is literally behind the sun, and that's Mercury's apogee, far from Earth. Well, for the moon, it's about this. And we can see it in the chart if we know that Lilith, which is this black point in space, and we say Black Moon Lilith. I like to also think of Black Moon Lilith as far moon Lilith, or small moon Lilith, or slow moon Lilith. So why those things? Right? Because literally when moon is conjoined Lilith in the chart, and that would be the conjunction with true Black Moon Lilith in the chart, that means moon is at apogee, far from Earth. And when moon is far from Earth, moon is slow, smaller, dimmer. You know, I think like a full moon. I'll just show this. The idea of a supermoon, which is moon opposite Lilith, here close, bright, big, fast, like literally apparently 30% brighter and 14% bigger than Moon when at apogee, which some call the micromoon, when Moon is far from Earth. Okay, now when Moon is square true black Moon Lilith, she's at an average distance from Earth. That's that 13 1/3 degrees per day. When Moon is close to Earth, it's like more than 15, sometimes 16 degrees per day. When Moon is far from Earth, conjoined Lilith in the chart, like 12 degrees per day, sometimes down in the 11s. And this is a monthly thing. That's an animalistic month. It's like 27 days-ish, 28. So when Moon is square Lilith, average size, speed, all that, although true black Moon Lilith is itself a deceiving name, not because of the black or the Lilith part, but the true part, okay? Because we have no effing idea where Lilith is unless the Moon is either conjoined Lilith or opposite Lilith. The rest, it's like theory. And so if you've tracked true black Moon Lilith on the chart, you'll know day by day, it's just kind of going all over the place. And so people ask all the time, do I choose true nodes or mean nodes, which are like the average, or true Lilith or mean Lilith? And my pitchy response is I try to tell the truth and I try not to be mean. But honestly, even the true calculations themselves are averages. They're calculated in a very different way. The mean won't show as much chaos. The mean lunar nodes only retrograde. They never, as I call it, directrograde or move direct. And the mean Lilith is way easier to kind of track cyclically and through time. And I think I value that too, but I do cast true Lilith on charts typically. Because when the Moon is conjoined Lilith, I know she's far and small and slow. And when opposite Lilith, I know she's bright and fast and close. And that's like the true Lilith that's going to show me that. And I mean, I have like mean Lilith and Pisces and true Lilith and Aries, and I want to consider both of those. And even some of the things that I'm going to tell you now about what I've come to feel in Lilith and how it's, I guess in the way that it agrees with my own personal cosmology, maybe you can hear this Pisces Aries thing in it. So who is Lilith? Besides the subject of this beautiful painting by Barrett Biggers. Like, why this name? And I mean, I'll tell you that when you research Lilith mythically, I guess I'll use that word, you know, it's a heavy road to walk sometimes. I mean, you can do this in pop culture. Well, you'll get like Lilith as like the queen of the vampires in different TV shows or video games, or Lilith as like the dark mirror of Eve and married to Samael, you know, like Satan basically, and some of the old religious texts. I mean, maybe I should call those spiritual texts. I mean, the first kind of Hebrew text that speaks of Lilith as this, I mean, it's a pretty difficult text of these like one-liners. And one of them says that, one of these lines is like, gold must be hammered and children must be beaten. Like, that's just awful. You know, it's like this 10th-ish century AD text. I'm like, I'm not going to get into it. I encourage you to go check it out, though. I mean, maybe we should have a look, but I think time will be tight for that one anyway. I mean, I'd rather use others' words rather than my own. But also, as I've gotten past the stickiness of what some of these like stories have to say, I can see why this point in space is carrying this name. So, I mean, I said like the oldest Jewish text, that's incorrect because the oldest one would be the Bible, where Lilith shows up in Isaiah at some point. And it seems to stretch back into the Akkadian, Assyrian, the Babylonian, perhaps, Lilith and Lilith. But I mean, that doesn't like make it a prettier picture, because some of those like were expressed in ways, and it's really obscure that, you know, as we look back that far and through the translations and etymology and all that, but some of those seem to speak of like these screech owl demons of the night who came and ate babies. And there was something about that transmission in the Lilith myth too. And these later texts where Lilith had said, and it's really interesting if you've read, you know, Genesis in the Old Testament, in the Bible, you know, the God creates human twice. And interestingly, I'm told, and I'm not scholarly enough or language educated enough to personally know, but that the first time human is created by the Elohim, which means it's a plural word with both masculine and feminine expression. And it basically says the gods, or the gods and goddesses created, right? And they create man and woman, like in their image. And then like on the next page, God El, which is like, you know, one singular, the God, you know, that Bible God, Jehovah, whatever, the name you're not meant to speak, or we don't know, who created Adam. And then you probably know this tale about pulling Eve from his rib and all that. Now there's some interesting kind of sci-fi correspondences. Zachariah Sitchin and whatnot about that, how that looks like, oh, genetic assistance from extraterrestrial beings or visitors or watchers, or who's to say. You know, every now and then it seems like the species just goes through a genetic update. Anyway, as long as we're here, which would be the second couple who were created, I guess, Adam and Eve. Well, perhaps this is an eclipse myth too. There is a serpent like Rahu or Bacchanawa or Python, or, you know, and then we eat the apple. Could the apple not be the sun or the moon having a bite taken out of it? Or Adam and Eve, the moon and the sun? Anyway, let's be back here. So it said that Lilith was made with Adam in the garden, and she chose to split and spoke the, you know, unspeakable, the name of the Lord, as she left. Why did she leave? And in this text, the alphabet of, was it alphabet of Ben? I should know. It's gone and it's not written down in my world. I guess I could push a couple dumb phone buttons and get there kind of quickly. But in this text, it said that she did not want to lie under Adam. But it doesn't stop there. And often I hear astrologers stop there when they're telling the Lilith stories. Where it goes is she did not want to lie under Adam, and he did not want to lie under her. And I mean, it typically reads, and it's usually suggested like there's this kind of sexual dominance, and neither one of them was going to be the bottom, and because that speaks of an inequality or something like this, right? And I think if I knew how to read older languages and was etymologically inclined or educated, maybe I would completely agree with that. But maybe this idea of being under or over is not just about hierarchy, and maybe it wasn't just about sex either. And truthfully, I don't know. That's the only way I've heard it said. And for so long, the only way I heard it said is Lilith did not want to lie under Adam, which is what God commanded, that she was made to be subservient. Like there's none of that in that text. Oh, it is a heavy text. I know I read that other line from it before. That one I'll never forget because it's just so rough. But that's not said. It said she doesn't want to lie under him. He doesn't want to lay under her, and she splits. And look, she leaves the garden. What is the garden? Like, let me go back to this picture. Where's the garden? Earth, friends. It's Earth. Okay. Where's the tree of, it's Earth's rotational axis. I will suggest the world tree, as I call it, the sword of the stone, the spine of Gaia. Which part of the moon's part has left the Earth? The apogee. Do you see that? And so this is why I'm really intrigued by how this name found its association with this dark point in space that is this, I guess, point, this foci of moon Earth love, that Lilith does direct our gaze to the place where the moon is most far from the garden. And opposite Lilith is that moon that's close. Okay, so what does that mean? How do we work with that astrologically? It really depends upon your cosmology. Now, Lilith, we're told, also, in some versions gave birth to demons, and some versions came in to eat the children of Adam, like stretching back into these kind of demons of cultures past. It's said in some of the transmissions that when the archangels and the archons were sent by the God to, bring her back into the garden where she was created to be, she would not come, and she made a deal so she could stay free. And the deal was that she would give 100 children a day, right? So I've read so many different versions of this thing. But I'm intrigued by that. I'm super intrigued by that because, what is it to be? Is this like baby eating thing literal? I don't even want to touch that place at all, and certainly not with you here today. So sigh of relief, but or to give children back. And this is what intrigued me as an astrologer. So I was intrigued by I started putting Lilith on the chart to know more about the moon, because I'm very interested in the moon. Aren't you? And what is the moon? Okay, what is the moon in your astrology? Is it instincts? Is it feelings? Is it what needs to be addressed so that we can feel safe and naturally ourselves? Like, what is the moon for you? What is the Earth for you? Have you considered that? Some paradigms will draw the Earth opposite the sun on the chart, which is actually, that's where Earth's shadow is cast. Earth is the center of the geocentric chart, right? And we don't consider it much, right? I always ask this, which one's the most important planet? There's maybe Jupiter, or, I'm speaking to, Jeffrey Wolf Green astrology, maybe Pluto, right? How about Earth? The garden, the planet where you chose to come and dance, or the planet that chose you. I don't know how it works, but I'm talking about the Earth. What is Earth? And in this idea, because I've learned so much through swinging the compass and initiating myself as far as I have been able to thus far in the geometry tradition, the sacred geometry tradition, which is a path of self-initiation. Swinging the compass to explore this idea of why astrology taught me the circle is spirit, or the crescent is soul, or the cross is matter, has taught me so much. There's a EA Zoom video that I've made that you can find here at EA's EA Zoom meetings, I should say, YouTube page, or you can go to GeminiBrett.com. And on the offerings page, I have a bunch of videos up there. And a few of them actually were presentations that I put together for EA Zoom meetings. Anyway, there's one there called Circle, Crescent, and Cross, or Spirit, Soul, and Matter, something of that, and you'll see it. And you'll see there kind of a like longer expression of why I've come to know Sun as spirit, by which I mean the one and only thing that ever was, is, and will be. Now, I'm not like a sun sign focused astrologer in that way. In fact, I will tell you that the reason why Sun's in Sagittarius right now has nothing to do with the sun. It's about Earth. And it's where Earth's tree, our rotational axis, which defines the cardinal directions, is in respect to the sun. Right now, we're about right here, about to get there, which is the southern pole leaning towards the sun. And we call that the sun's ingress tropical Capricorn, when it's shining directly above the Tropic of Capricorn, you know? So it's Earth that determines the sun sign. I like this old cosmology, which is that the stars are simply holes in the veil that lets the one light shine through, the light we're not allowed to see, or we will remember we are it, and the gig is up. And we're all out of the garden. There's no garden anymore at all. And that the sun is the big one because it's the hole that we're closest to. Now, I'm not saying the sun's not some nuclear burning furnace in the sky, and what I learned in astronomy school was wrong or whatever. I'm just saying I like that cosmology in regard to, well, what I'm coming to accept is to be my religion. And then I feel that the moon's incarnational role is to reflect that one light in a unique way, which will never repeat here to Earth. And that's what I call soul. Now, I know I'm speaking to many of a paradigm of a tradition that sees that idea of soul and Pluto, and that's cool. And I've actually often kind of considered the truth that the Pluto Charon experience, Pluto and the principal moon of Charon are both tidally locked. And unlike Earth, Charon appears to be 8 times larger than the sun in Pluto's sky. Like the Pluto Charon thing is like the really weird Earth moon thing, because moon is huge, experience like magnified by 8 plus. However, eclipses are much less common on Pluto, interestingly. Anyway, in my current cosmology, moon is soul, which I used to think of as one like little piece of the all. And if we put all the souls together, we get the all. But now I understand that the all is indivisible. When I say understand, I mean, do I? Right? So it's like said, cosmology, we should have a working cosmology. We should also not be married to our beliefs, and expectation is the enemy of participation. We should allow ourselves to like let it flow, right? So for me, because spirit cannot be divided, it can only come here in matter by being reflected in its entirety. And that for me is a soul. So each of you is that, and you're each a unique one, because moon will never reflect sunlight or one light in the same way twice, or in the same place on Earth in the same way in the same moment either. Like I literally do not need to go beyond the Earth, Moon, Sun system to show you astronomically, undeniably, that every moment on Earth in each unique place is completely unique and will never repeat. So if sun is psyche and moon is feelings, right? I mean, here we don't really have sun on the picture, right? It's like moon, earth, and space, right? So it's, I'll say like moon in the garden or away from the garden. In this cosmology with which I'm currently working, close moon is a soul that is really excited to come play. And far moon is a soul that's a little bit more hesitant. And actually far place, so Lilith points the way, is a place on our chart. So I mean like Lilith on your chart. And I personally currently prefer the true black moon Lilith calculation. That is a place where you can access the not incarnated, the away from the garden, the wilds, the before you are here in a body, which is, this is great. I'm not saying to get away. I'm not saying to ascend and the earth is not your friend and da da da. I mean, sometimes it feels that way. For me, we incarnate, the sun reflects itself through moon into matter so we can make moves because we need that appearance of motion in time and space to grow. I think of the sun as our local representative of the one only thing that ever was, is, and will be everything, which inherently is nothing because it's already everything. So it can't grow, but it will never stop doing so because of miracles like you, which are spirit reflected through soul into matter, because here in matter, we can make moves. And as you grow, which is the gift of this weird heart that lives in the body suit, right? Because feeling opens healing and healing opens knowing, and your knowing as you're growing, and as you grow, spirit grows. For me, that's the trip. And then all of the other planets have their own contributions in beautiful ways, and we could go on and on and on. But what about Lilith? Lilith for me is this special place, this portal of the zodiac where you can go to remember what you were before you were reflected in this unique way, to experience life as a soul in matter. It's a place where you can return to the spirit realm. So for me, like returning, I'll retrograde back to an unfinished statement, probably one of many today, which was that I started putting Lilith on the chart because I wanted to see more about the moon. So I used to look at tables, right? Oh, was the moon like high or low? And I mean like north or south of the ecliptic. Well, that would be a northern hemisphere correspondence. But then I learned to see that with the moon's aspect to the nodes. And the nodes were always on the chart for me. But then I put Lilith because I want to know the moon's speed. And I used to look to a table. So the moon's 14 degrees per day. That's a fast moon-ish. 15, that's a really quick moon. What does that mean? Fast feelings, I guess? Because that's what the moon used to be to me. But now I understand, and Lilith has helped me see, wait a second, that moon is fast because she's close. Close to what? Close to Earth. Well, what does it mean? Why? Right? What is the moon in this current cosmology, this framework of, well, moon is this soul, this incarnational device to reflect the one light in a unique way to Earth. What is it when that's close to Earth? It's like ready to get it going. And that's how I see moon opposite Lilith, which we've come to call supermoon. Big moon, near moon, fast moon. And what about that micro moon? Okay, so I started putting Lilith on the chart to know more about the moon, but then I started seeing these things. And I started having these really important experiences as a counselor. If you're a counseling astrologer, I imagine you have had similar experiences where like you get this like theme of the year or theme of the month or of the week or whatever. And we can see it in what's happening in the stars at the time. We can see it in like the consult chart. We can see it in our own chart, right? Or our own healing path or our own learning path. It's like, okay, I'm ready to try to understand this or help offer love for this or receive love from this or whatever. And then or look back in my shadow in this way. And so, oh my God, that thing I've been so afraid of is now sitting across the table from me night after night, day after day, as I'm reading charts that I can't see anything but mine and my own pain. You know what I mean? Like this will happen for us in our work if we choose to be heart before chart, open people. And it's really tricky, and it tends to bring also cosmological shifts. So I swear every time I think I'm getting good, like something comes in and everything has to change and the whole framework gets rearranged. And this one is, I guess, Cosmology 4.0 for me in my young 9-year adventure as an astrologer. So Lilith's on the chart, and I started noticing these amazing things. And it was one of these, well, frankly, it was like a month where I sat with maybe 6 different women and 1 man who were, and I mean in 7 different sessions, who were all having this like retrograde back to an abortion moment in their life. And at the time, they did what they had to do. And some of them, I mean, I would say like just for these women, you know, whether there's like a loving partner there, you know, trying to honor this is your decision and supporting that, or making a decision or two, you know, you're just so alone. And I mean, I can't say, obviously, right? And I haven't been on the other side of that either, you know, so I've just witnessed this, held space. And I mean, it's just so amazing to see, because there was this like month for me in session. It was back when I used to get to sit with people, and the drum would come out, and you know, like there's like a different part of my work at that time, and when I was living in Seattle. And this happened again and again and again, like women who are starting to have this, not necessarily regret, but this opening and this opportunity to go back to this thing from their past where they were seeing, they were holding some mystery. I mean, I almost said trauma, but it wasn't really that. Sometimes it was, you know. And I learned to ask this question. I mean, just gosh, the first time I said, okay, well, what is the child's name? It's like, what do you mean? You know, it's like that was the most common response, except for once. And then I say, well, was it a boy or a girl? And pardon me if those terms are too limited, but anyway, that's what I would ask. And then it was like, oh, it's a girl. And then instantly it was a girl. Wait, how do I know that? And then we would just go deep, you know, it was like more drum than chart. And then this name would come forward. And this like understanding, this realization that this was one of this person's most important guides. And I really loved that and felt that. Now, I learned that I wanted that understanding, right? And so just kind of circling back to how much of this is what's happening, or what I want to happen, or who knows, right? But it was such a powerful teaching to me that these like, you know, miscarriages, stillbirths, abortions, you know, babies who come and die so young, which is just so awful, you know. That one, like, I think especially that there is something in these beings who are like wanting to come close to the garden, but not necessarily get stuck. And I don't want to like, I don't want to like exalt that and say what wise beings who like won't get stuck in Earth. Like, I don't think of Earth as prison planet. Although, gosh, hasn't it felt that way of late? Anyway, but there was something special I was hearing, and all 7 of these people, and there's been many since actually, where this kind of experience, like where they were in their growth, they were able to go back and look at this thing that they didn't have the opportunity to look at or experience in its richness at the time. And it came with the awareness of a very special soul, like on the other side, like one that just never quite came into what I'll call the garden, that is here to help them, guide them. And I mean, in many of these cases, if like the 4 of those 7, in a many sense, it was like, this was the moment, or maybe I could dare say this was the being that literally planted the seed of this individual's spiritual awakening. And it didn't happen necessarily in that moment. I'm sure many of you like me have had that thing to like, this is the thing, but it's like years later where I'm like, oh my God, that was the thing, right? And that's what I was seeing here. Now, how is this relevant? Because what I was surprised to see is now having Lilith on the chart. I mean, originally I was taught like, why put Lilith on the chart? There's nothing there. There's enough planets anyway. Well, I had Lilith on the chart because I'm very astronomically inclined, obviously, and I wanted to know more about the moon. And in each of these cases, or 5 out of 7, there's these really strong alignments to natal Lilith by transiting planets during the time of the event and when the client was with me, and significant aspects in that natal chart with Lilith too. You know, this morning I took this adventure. I decided not to bring these charts in because I kind of don't want to go there. But if you look at the Roe versus Wade chart, you'll see a strong conjunction with Lilith and Mars, true Black Moon Lilith and Mars. And so what I was doing this morning is I was at this like ACLU page about very important contraception and abortion cases in the Supreme Court here in the United States since like the 1800s with contraception, and then since the 60s and some of the other topics, right? Which is really hot right now. Like, it's another thing just happened in Texas like yesterday and in September of this year. And anyway, a lot of these charts, I was not surprised at this point to see significant natal Lilith aspects, and oftentimes moon and sun. So I need to take that into a deeper research. Yeah, I don't know. It's also a really challenging topic, you know? And who am I to speak about? Like, that's one of my fears. I feel like I would probably work on that with someone. All right. So that was spirit calling, saying, dude, you got other things to learn. Anyway, so this image of like eating babies, heavy, right? But maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's a spiritual win that's about, it's not your time yet. This isn't the chart for you. Like, come in, get close, but are you sure? Like, you can elect a better time for what your soul wants to do. Maybe though, you should come here and like help these other people get to their next level, get a little closer. What do you think, right? And that maybe this Lilith myth has something to do, this leaving the garden. And I would suggest even perhaps keeping others from gardening and from incarnating, right? But allowing them to be these kind of angels in the dark. And that there's something there. And that there's something here in the garden too, in this snake, in this fruit, you know, that feels very eclipsy to me. So these are very important points to know, along with, of course, Earth, Moon, and Sun, matters, soul, and spirit, if you want to understand eclipse in the chart. And I hope that when you tune now into Black Moon Lilith, you'll also see far moon, slow moon, small moon, or when square, average moon. I like the word average, it's awful. But I don't know, you're like normal, even worse. I don't know. Like, moon's moving 13 1/3 degrees and is like the average size in the sky, not big, not small, whatever. Okay, so Lilith, conjoined Lilith, far moon, slow moon. Opposite Lilith, close moon, fast moon, big moon. And so when you look now at this lunar eclipse chart, look at how moon is with Lilith. What does that mean? Moon was far from Earth, further from the shadow. I mean, you can see how close to the nodes. Like, how was that eclipse not total? Because the shadow only reaches so far and the moon's further out. And why is it the longest partial eclipse of the millennia of your lifetime? Why? Because moon is moving slowly. Moon Lilith. So very close to the node, very close to the heart of Earth's shadow, but so far that the shadow can't quite reach, but slowly moving almost all of the moon through that shadow. But eclipsed by clouds here where I was, so I finally slept. And what about this solar eclipse? Total solar eclipse. Oh my gosh, but that far from the node? I mean, that's 10 1/2 degrees or something. What? That's like, isn't it more than 955? Now we're going to also have to turn on the parallax moon, and that's a tale for another time. But one thing to bring us here in the end back to this friend Lilith, well, this is of new moon opposite Lilith. So what does that mean about moon? Big, close, big, supermoon. Now we usually reserve that term supermoon to describe a full moon, but this is a big moon, right? And because the moon is close to Earth, it has more body to occult the sun with. So even though far from the nodes, and I meant to put up 2 solar eclipse image where one's like right with the nodes, and look at any annular eclipse, okay? Not any, but sometimes you'll see an annular eclipse and it's right with the nodes and you're like, that's gotta be total, but it's with Lilith or even like square Lilith, and it's like the moon is too small to occult the entire solar disk. So ring of fire, annular eclipse for you. Here, the moon and the sun are so far from the node, it's like, I was like, oh, that's definitely a partial eclipse. Nope, opposite Lilith. And we've got to get parallax too. But I think you've heard enough from me. It is such a treat to be back here once again with you, my friends, and here at EA Zoom meetings. It's been a wonderful blessing to be honored in this way and have your wonderful venue host me time and again. And I look forward to coming back next year. And I hope that this eclipse allows powerful shift for you and an acceleration. And by looking back, you can look forward. And hopefully this has given you some new ideas of how you can play with Lilith in your own nativity and in the charts of loved ones or special moments in the world. Thanks again, friends. See you in space. Oh, yeah, last thing, please come find me at GeminiBrett.com. This is my job. If you want to tune more into these themes in your own chart or look into eclipse cycles or astrolocality or anything, I'm here for you. Thanks. Thank you so much, Sue, for hosting this and having me around.
All I can say is, oh my, wow. Thank you again. You always get me thinking about, you know, something, taking me on another path of learning. Appreciate it.
Very honored to hear that, and touche, because there's many things that you've brought to our world that have completely opened my eyes in new ways. So it's nice to be here with you, and I'm excited to go to Liverpool with Eric Myers next. So I'll see you there.
Awesome. Okay, see you in a bit. Thank you very much.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.